It's Sabre Day. Happy Sabre Day, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to our first meeting up here in Northern New England. I am the chair of the Northern New England chapter, Bruce McClure, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter of Sabre in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, to start the day, we have a great leadoff hitter for you. Tyler Kepner is the senior writer for The Athletic covering Major League Baseball. He has previously worked for the New York Times covering the Mets and Yankees and serving as national baseball columnist from 2010 to 2023. A Vanderbilt University graduate, he has covered the California Angels for the Riverside Press Enterprise and the Seattle Mariners for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. That's not an easy word to say at 9 a.m, and began his career with a homemade baseball magazine in his native Philadelphia in the early 1990s. Tyler is the author of the best-selling book K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches, and The Grandest Stage, A History of the World Series. And he's also our recently crowned Immaculate Grid Tournament champion. And he's here with us today to talk about his career and life in baseball. Tyler Kepner. Can't thank you enough for stopping by today, my friend. Welcome to Northern New England. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We are terrific up here. We're a little bit cold, just like it was last year on Sabre Day. Mm-hmm. We originally had planned on meeting in person for our first in-person meeting in our fledgling chapter, and it turned out the temperatures crashed to about, I don't know, it was 1,000,000 degrees below zero, so we gave up and just did this online. Seems to be the way to go.
Yeah, so, can't beat the commute. No, it's I'm here in New England. I'm in the in Connecticut, so Fairfield County, but it's bright and sunny, but I haven't been outside yet. I'm sure it's pretty cold.
Yeah, we're bright and sunny out here too, but it is pretty cold out here. So we're going to stay inside, stay warm, and converse with you when it comes to learning a little bit about your career and your life in baseball. But first, I want to ask you, how does it feel to be crowned the very first Northern New England chapter Immaculate Grid Champion?
Well, the pressure was on because I put that out there every day on X, and so I kind of had to live up to the reputation. But I was just hoping there would be none of those tricky ones. Fortunately, I got some kind of boards where I could do all right. Sometimes the season stat ones, like today they had 100 runs, and that's a little tricky. I got 12 today, half of it in one square, but I love the crossover. I love the team crossover ones. Those are my favorite because I can just come up, think of it's that old like remember some guys thing, and like yep. Remember some guys is like my favorite game because you just it's memories of these baseball players particularly from when you were growing up, just kind of stay in there. So I love it.
Yeah, I love playing the game. I don't typically try to get I don't try to drive down my rarity score because I am not the one with the encyclopedic knowledge as you are, but if I can complete the grid and do well, I'm all set.
Yeah, that's me in football or basketball. Like I love those sports. They're great, but I have a lot of blind spots there. So if I complete one of those, I'm pumped, but that doesn't happen very often.
Let's get started here. I want to let everybody know that down the bottom of the page, there's a button marked reactions. It is the third button from the right. You can click that button and another one will come up that says raise hand. We're just going to open this up to questions as we go along today. It's going to be a great Q&A session. If you have a question for Tyler Kepner about his life in baseball, his career, his books, or anything, please raise your hand. We'll get to you as we move along in our meeting today. But first, I want to talk to you, Tyler, for a minute. I'm always jealous of the writers, especially in Sabre. I don't have that talent. I guess my lane has been starting this chapter and doing these videos on a weekly basis. But tell me how you got started writing.
Well, I was fortunate to grow up outside Philadelphia at a time when the Phillies were really good. It was the end of their great stretch there with Mike Schmidt and Steve Carlton, Pete Rose, and it was such an exciting time. So even though they lost in the World Series of Baltimore in '83, and I was 8, and I went to a couple of those games, and they weren't very good after that for a while, but by then I was hooked. So I love the whole major league scene. Not just the Phillies, which you see now. You see a lot of people like really hone in on their local teams, but maybe not be as engaged nationally. But I was just hooked on all of it. So the other great thing about Philadelphia, besides that the team was good, was they had a lot of great writing there. Jason Stark, who I get to work with now at the Athletic, and is a great friend of mine, a mentor, all of it. He was the guy at the Inquirer, Philadelphia Inquirer, at the time, and he had I guess it was Tuesday and then the Sunday column, a week review, and he just made baseball seem so fun, and baseball writing seemed like such a viable career, that it really inspired me. And I read a lot of books. I read Sports Illustrated. I read everything you could think of, and collected cards and went to a lot of games. Played baseball in Little League up through high school. So it was just always around. The radio, the TV. I made sure it was always sort of I was submerged in baseball. And then when I got to be 12, 13, especially 14 and up, I started writing my own baseball magazine. And first it was, it looked like this, and it was somewhat crude, and we would color in the covers. We'd have my friends over and draw or color it in on a Saturday, and then eventually we got a color printer. We found a color printer, and so we could do that, and it got but it was still had kind of that homemade feel. Dave Winfield there, and at the end, this is '94. We had Carlos Baerga, and Romero, and I would go to the vet in Philly and do interviews down there, and then when I got my license, I could drive a little bit. I would go down to Baltimore and do some interviews at one at Memorial Stadium and then Camden Yards, and so I just really got the bug. I was around all the time in high school, at the vet, usually in that visitors clubhouse as the teams would come through. The Phillies were always there, but you only had a couple days to get the Giants or the Padres or the Expos or whoever. So I'd be over and just getting interviews and learning how to do it, through experience and through observing and talking to the professionals who were all around me. So I had a lot of people willing to help and encourage me in that kind of environment. So it was a lifelong sort of dream and goal to be doing what I'm doing now. I went to Vanderbilt, which had still has a scholarship for sports writers named after Fred Russell and Grantland Rice, some sports writing legends who went there. So from there, it was just kind of your traditional path back in the 90s. I got a couple internships, Boston Globe, Washington Post, and then started at a smaller paper. But I wanted to cover Major League Baseball. That was the thing. Like, I felt like I put myself in position to do that right away, rather than having to go the route where most people have to do, or have to, you cover high schools and then you kind of work your way up. And I just I'll go anywhere as long as I can cover Major League Baseball, and that happened to be in suburban LA, and I got the Angels beat out there in Riverside, and did that for a year, and then went on up to Seattle and did the Mariners for a little over a year, and that was great because that was like full-time travel. Riverside was part-time travel, and like I paid for some of it with my own miles and stuff, or stayed with relatives on the road, and but I made most of the trips with the Angels, and then all the trips with the Mariners, every single day of spring training with the Mariners. Really some just getting deep into that organization, and then after a year and 4 months, the New York Times hired me to cover the Mets, and did those Mets for 2 eventful years, 2000 when they made the World Series, and then 2001 and everything that happened then in New York. So after that, I did the Yankees for 8 years, and those were tremendous. I mean, I just missed that dynasty era, but it was like the dynasty was still continuing because they were winning 100 games every year, making the playoffs all the time. They had so many great players. In the 8 years, they made the World Series in 03 and 09, and they won in 09. But just to have the chance to cover so many interesting Hall of Fame bound or Hall of Fame numbers like Clemens and A-Rod kind of guys. The core four and Bernie and Giambi, Matsui, Mussina, Randy Johnson and Sheffield, and they just Abreu, they just kept coming. I mean, Sabathia, Teixeira at the end. It was just amazing. But you learned just as much, if not even more, from like the bench guys and the backup catchers and the bullpen guys and the coaches. Joe Torre was the manager. We had coaches like Larry Boa was there, and who I also had in Anaheim, and Mel Stottlemyre and Zimmer and Guidry, and it was just Steinbrenner was still alive. It was fascinating. So I've been really fortunate to cover a lot of those teams on a day-to-day basis to get that foundation. I mean, the foundation was as a kid, and then you build on that with the magazine stuff in high school, and then the internships, and then the cover the beat is the real foundation. And then since then, I've been doing the national job. The times when they drop baseball or when they drop sports, and use the Athletic now for the Times Sports because we own it. I switched over to the Athletic. I was like, I wasn't going to stay at the Times and not cover baseball or cover the cultural aspects of sports or whatever the Times emphasizes now. I wanted to be really in MLB, covering the games, the players, the teams, the leagues. That's the stuff that really interests me. And so I went over to the Athletic, and I'm still doing that. Along the way, I wrote the 2 books that you mentioned, and those were just such a fun experience, and I can't wait to do another one, hopefully. So just that's kind of where my career has taken me. I live here in Connecticut. Moved here because my wife was working at GE, which was up in Fairfield at the time, and it was like I was covering the Mets, so it was really not too far. I don't go into the city very often. I just go to the ballpark. So I get to work here or work at the stadiums, and so it's not the highest paying job, but it is a job that a lot of people who do make a lot of money but don't love their jobs, they kind of they're like envy me and I envy them. I'm like, I wish I had your paycheck. They're like, I wish I had your job. So it's like it's fun. It all works out because it's nothing can beat really doing what you always wanted to do as a kid. I mean, if that's what my goal was, and to get to do that, you can't have any complaints. So it's I love it.
That's pretty awesome. That's quite a story. So when you were young, you were a Phillies fan. Who were your guys?
Well, my favorite all-time player was Steve Carlton, because in 1982 was my first year really following baseball, and that was his last Cy Young year, and he was just a larger-than-life kind of mysterious sort of presence. He would go out there every 4 or 5 days and just strike a lot of people out and usually win and stay in 9 innings. I mean, he's the last guy to pitch 300 innings in a season. He's the first guy to get 4 Cy Young awards. At the end of the 83 season, I'm 8 years old, and the Phillies make to the World Series, and Steve Carlton wins the clinching game against the Dodgers, just like he had against the Royals. And at the end of that season, he's the all-time leader in strikeouts with 4 Cy Youngs. I mean, it was greatness. It was just someone I really loved to watch. And it didn't last long because he was released in '86. But by then, it was number 32 was my number, and he was going to be my guy. So I remember seeing him. My first game at Fenway Park, actually, it was great. Total luck, but they were playing the Twins, and he was pitching. He was starting for the Minnesota Twins that day, and he gave up a grand slam to Don Baylor, and he didn't last long in the game. But but it was kind of poignant to see him pitch one last time there. My first time at Fenway when I was 12, and my dad was wearing a Phillies hat, and we were sitting down the right field line near the bullpens, and he kept yelling, "Lefty, lefty, lefty!" Looked over and kind of waved at him. He saw the Phillies hat. And I got him for the book. It was great. I got to talk to him for the book. He doesn't obviously do many interviews. He's a different kind of dude, but I was able to get him, and I thought I'd get him for like 15 minutes, and he was real chatty. We talked about the slider for 38 minutes, I think, and he was great. So, but I mean, I loved all the guys. I mean, I and especially now, like in retrospect, you really hold a candle for all those dudes who you grew up watching, whether they were great at the time or not so good. They remind you of a time in your life, I think, when you were just you rhapsodize about being a kid and watching these guys. And so I have a real fondness for all of them. And, that's sort of one of my little Immaculate Grid secrets, is that a lot of those Phillies players, I can just tell you everywhere they went in their entire careers. And so Dickie Knowles, Warren Brewstar, Ron Reed, whoever, all of them, I could just bing, bing, bing. Luis Aguayo, Greg Gross, whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Just like
names I haven't heard in years.
They show up in my grids all the time.
That's
Bo
awesome.
Diaz, yeah.
My first time that I went to Fenway on my own without my parents bringing me was kind of a similar story to yours, seeing Steve Carlton. I walk into Fenway and buy a program, and I'm looking at the starting lineup for the day and who's starting for the Red Sox. Tom Seaver. Couldn't believe I just walked into Fenway Park and I'm watching. Now he got shellacked, but I got to see Tom Seaver pitch for the Red Sox.
I always think it would have been so great if he hadn't hurt his knee late in the '86 season that ended his career. If he could have made a start in that World Series against the Mets, maybe him instead of Al Nipper in Game 4 or something. I mean, it would have just been, man. The idea that Seaver was actually on the other side in that World Series was incredible. But that's part of the great, the connections and the web that baseball weaves. I mean, who got the last out in that World Series? It was Jesse Orosco. Yep. And Jesse Orosco came to the Mets. He was traded for Jerry Koosman, who got the last out in their first World Series championship. And the guy who made that last out in the first championship was Davey Johnson, who was managing them in '86. So all this stuff, like, that you see, like the Phillies championships, right? Like in '80 at the Vet, there was a lefty wearing number 45 who struck out a righty. And in '08, the opposite of '80, at Citizens Bank Park, it was a righty wearing number 54 who struck out a lefty. So it was the exact mirror image. Everything just in a mirror there. Carlton and Willie Wilson, Brad Lidge and Eric Hinsky, lefty righty, that ballpark, this ballpark, AstroTurf grass. It was just, that's the fun stuff. Like, you just realize, like, oh man,
I need that mind. I need that mind. I'm too old for that at this point in my life. But I'll tell you,
80, 08, it was all meant to be. Right.
That's, oh my gosh. I wish I had that mind to continue those connections going forward and whatnot. So your first job covering a Major League Baseball club was covering the Angels out west. Tell me a little bit about covering the Angels and what that was like. You alluded to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was I mean, we've all probably done it in a sense, like, when you're 22 or whatever age, you move away for good, and then you kind of gotta sink or swim on your own. And I really prepared. I remember when I got the job, I was working in Washington, and I took all my baseball weeklies, because I still had them all. I would keep them, and I went to a photocopy store in DC and just photocopied every Angels box score from the '97 season and put them in a book, and just to familiarize myself with everything, and read widely about all this. So I was prepared. And I'd been in clubhouse, I'd been covering teams, or I'd been I'd done millions of, thousands of interviews, but I just, to have that actual experience covering a beat was something really new. And, I look back now and it's, again, it was fortunate. I mean, I'm still using those Angels connections every day. Like I text Immaculate Grid results every day with a couple of players from that team. We have a spirited, daily fun interactions with Steve Sparks and Todd Green. And I was, on the phone this week with Joe Madden and Bill Bavasi, who was the GM. And because we're, a couple other guys, we're doing a story on, I'm doing a story on Brock Purdy's dad, Sean Purdy, who was a minor league pitcher in the Angels in the 90s, Angel system in the 90s. So a little before I was there, but like a lot of the same people knew him. So, Terry Collins managed that Angel team and then he managed the Mets for a bunch of years. So I'd see him all the time in New York. So those connections keep coming back, getting to cover that World Series 4 years later for the New York Times when a lot of those same Angels won, Salmon and Garrett Anderson and Erstad and Percival. That was really neat to have seen that team kind of building to that. But it was cool. What was cool was one of the cool things was back-to-back years they kind of opened new stadiums. Like the Angels renovated all of Angel Stadium or Anaheim Stadium that year, so I got to cover that kind of new renovated ballpark. And then in Seattle, I got to cover the Mariners in both the Kingdome and then mid-season in '99 when they moved to Safeco Field, whatever it is now, T-Mobile Park. So that was just an amazing year. And like that was I did 12 years in the beat, and the Mariners year was the only one where the team didn't have a winning record because the Yankees always win and the Mets, were pretty good. But it was probably the most interesting team I ever covered, because it was a real transition year, not just between ballparks, but that was the year Pat Gillett came in at the end of the year, and they were not spending enough money. Griffey got fed up with it and asked for a trade after the season, so it was his last year of his first go around. A-Rod, I saw him get the 40-40 in '98 at the end of that season, and then and so he was there. Edgar was there, Piniella. So again, you just have these big personalities, Buhner, Moyer, Freddie Garcia, but like there was this undercurrent of like, man, we're gonna blow this thing. We're gonna have all these great players and never win. And then the next year, I'm in the Mets. I'm covering the Mets, but they get to the LCS a couple times, and Ichiro comes along in '01, and it Brett Boone and everybody. So like it was just it was an interesting time to be there because it was sort of so not hopeless, but like this despair in '99. We're not going to seize our window here, and these players are going to leave, and then that guy who tried out in spring training or who just as a goodwill thing came over for a couple of weeks named Ichiro Suzuki in '99. He turned out to be pretty good in '01. So that, but I could talk about those things all day. I mean, it was just such an education, getting to cover veteran players when you're 22, 23 years old and around them every day.
That's pretty awesome. You went from California to Seattle. You just talked about that. You took one of my questions. That's okay. But now you're in New York. Are you covering the Mets this year again, or have you moved on to more feature writing?
What's that? In 2000?
You moved on to the Mets.
Yeah.
So we know you covered the Mets and the Yankees for an awfully long time. Let me shift gears now. What was that like? You went from LA, Seattle, which I don't, and I might be wrong, but I don't consider it that big city vibe like in New York, Chicago, LA. You moved back east. You're now back in New York. What's that like for a writer? That's got to be frenetic.
Yeah, but I assumed all those things too. But what I found was that when you're working on the beat and take it seriously, it almost doesn't matter like how many readers you have. You just want to get the stories and you want to have the best coverage. And in Seattle, it was actually in some ways more intense because it was the Seattle Times and me. and the Tacoma paper.
Mhm.
So like there were really only 3 beat writers who were with the team every day, and we were all going for the same stories. And if you missed a story, it really stood out if the other guy had it, because it was like, there was only 1 or 2 losers. But if you were in New York and somebody had a story and there were 10 people, 10 beat writers, there might be 9 losers. So you had company in that. And also in the bigger markets where there's so many people covering the teams, there's a lot of like, pack mentality where like, all right, well, we only need to talk to this guy, or we only need to talk to this guy. So a lot of stuff happens in groups, and that gives you an opportunity to know what's going to be the main topic of the day, but also gives you an opportunity to kind of find other stuff that people aren't getting to distinguish you. So I was able to kind of work those angles, and be really friendly and collegial with all the writers, and we got along great. We laughed. I mean, you just see so much humor and just absurdities on the beat, and you have some friends who are other beat writers for other papers, and we just we still share stories and have inside jokes about all those teams, and but the competitive aspect of it was it was intense, but it was like it was manageable because you had other people at your paper, right? You had like I worked with veteran guys like Jack Curry and Murray Chass and Buster Olney, and they might help you out. Dave Anderson and George Vesey were there, so you had like this a bigger team support staff around you. And I always thought New York was like a snake pit where everybody was like angry all the time and rude, like you see in the movies, and inconsiderate people, and it's really not that way at all. Like, I mean, I fit in fine, just kind of by being myself, and again, the numbers, I kind of made the numbers work for me, because again, when it's just like 3 beat writers, it's like you just occupy much more of the spotlight, whereas in New York, when there's so many writers, you can kind of make your own spotlight and stand out your own way. Like if I'm describing it right, I just the Times was a perfect fit, because we had some editors who had been at the Post and the News, and they knew what was a important story that the tabloids might have, and what was just sort of fluff, or not fluff, but just like a passing kind of thing, or something that was overhyped. And so like those guys did the Post and the News, and everybody, they did a great job, and I loved their coverage, but it was a little slightly different than mine. And the Times could we had a good perspective on what stuff we really needed to jump in on and what stuff we didn't, but we were still down there throwing elbows with all the other beat writers, and that was fun. It's not like that anymore. It's really not. Papers budgets have shrunk, and there's not a feeling that you have to be with a team every day, and that's what I grew up on. I mean, I feel like you got to be around the team every day to really know what's going on. So there's still a lot of men and women who do a great job at it, but not as many media outlets are committed to covering the team the way I was raised on it, from 97 to 09.
That's very interesting. We've got some questions that are coming in from the crowd here, so I'm going to go to the membership. Eric Poulin, you're up first. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, Bruce. Good morning. Thanks for putting this together. Tyler, thanks for joining us. It's great to hear your story. And actually, my question kind of dovetails into a few things that you said at the end there. So in higher ed and academia, the big question that we're asking, and I feel like it's obviously a relevant question to you all in journalism and writing. AI, ChatGPT. What are your thoughts? I mean, we're trying in higher ed, I think we're trying to be cautiously optimistic about it and try to use it as a tool. But, as I hear you saying that budgets are shrinking and outlets aren't really devoting the human resources, it might be a cause of concern. And obviously, we all know what happened with Sports Illustrated recently. I guess I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I don't worry about it actively yet. Maybe someday I'll have to, but because I feel like in terms of covering a team, like the AP is always the fail safe, right? Like you're not going to really need to computer generate a story because the Associated Press will always have a writer there. So if you want to just pull your writers off the road and still put something on your website or in print about the team, you just toss the AP up there and they do a good job. So, or they give you the solid report. So, and anything else, I think you can spot. I mean, I don't know. Like I've seen examples of AI generated sports writing, and usually it's pretty easily detected as a robot, writing it. So, which I just love that image of like a robot sitting in the press box. But with like the press hat on. But no, but so I don't worry about it too much right now. But I can see in academia how it would be a huge issue, and maybe it's coming, to sports journalism. But the early forays I've seen of AI in sports journalism are pretty pathetic and pretty easy to sniff out. I mean, sports fans, it's like it's interesting, people always say, oh, it's the toy department or whatever, but sports fans are pretty. They don't take any BS, and they can sniff it out pretty quickly, I think. But maybe not. Then again, there's a lot of people who just shout on TV, and they seem to get a lot of attention. So I don't know. I still really believe in trying to do it right and talk to people. Imagine that. Like actually talk to the people who do it. Like we have this access, use it. Get out there and talk to the people. That's what distinguishes us. Sports writers from anybody else. This is because we have access to the people, and we can ask them questions. I can go up before a game and talk to the people who are going to participate in it. What a concept, let's go out and use that access into it.
Right. Great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your answer.
Sure, Eric.
Sports Illustrated, was it Sports Illustrated that just got dinged for the AI articles? And now
they had like this, it was a content on their weird website where it was like, it wasn't so much like, it wasn't really the SI editorial staff, right, or anything like that, but it was like a product review sort of system that they used. And they're, that's sad what's happened over there. And
yeah,
I don't know if there be a Sports Illustrated anymore.
Yeah, it looks like there will not be a Sports Illustrated anymore, and that's just a sad thing. Let's go to our next question with Molly. Molly, you're up.
I was wondering, Tyler, what was the hardest article you ever had to write? Either like from a point of just trying to get the words on the page or emotionally. What was your hardest article?
That's a great question. I think when I was in college, we had a couple of kids who were killed in a drunk driving accident in the middle of campus. And I was the editor of the paper there at Vandy. And that was hard. I mean, it's a tragedy right in the middle of campus. I didn't know the kids, but, you had to call up, talk to the parents about, what do you remember about how do you want your kids to be remembered and all that. But the biggest thing was our photographer, like, he was right on the scene, and he went out there and he got a picture of the cops like taking the kids in the body bags and putting them into the ambulance. And we had a big debate, like should we use that? And some people on the staff thought, no, it's insensitive, and I ran it because I'm like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is happening on our campus, and this is the truth. Like this is the truth of what happened that night, and the drunk driving accident in the middle of our campus, and don't run from the truth. I mean, we're not showing like severed limbs, but like, it's in a bag. It happened. It's in the middle of our campus in public. Plus our photographer, he was on the scene. He's doing, that's what you're supposed to do in journalism. And so I ran it. And, that was tough because of the circumstances involved. But I would do it again every time. And I feel like that's one of the things now that, in a larger issue, that, I mean, we're, SABR, it's just history and historians. And I don't think there's anything wrong with presenting history as it happened and trying to understand the context of it. We see that in education now, like, oh, we shouldn't teach this, or we shouldn't teach that, or we shouldn't say that the Civil War was caused by slavery or whatever. Like, it's our history, it's like, and just there's no sense in running from it. And so it's part of what I like about baseball history is that you don't have, it's not as emotionally charged as all that other stuff, and I can get the benefit of telling the history and sharing the history and learning from the history without the kind of political nonsense or emotional, dilemmas that came up in that college incident. So that's probably not what you were asking about, but that's the first thing I thought of when you talk about the hardest.
No, it was just whatever came to mind. It was kind of just an open-ended question, so thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, Alan.
Keep those hands up for just a minute, but Tyler's giving me a great segue into my next portion of this program. Tyler, you've written 2 books on the history of Major League Baseball. The first one in 2019 called K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about that book and the process for writing, how it came about.
There they are. That one, I had always wanted to write a book, and I found that I really wanted to do something that I was naturally passionate about, and that's pitching. I mean, I pitched as a kid in high school and media games at Yankee Stadium and Fenway Park and stuff. But the aspect of pitching, going back to Steve Carlton, was just the aspect of baseball that most fascinated me was pitching, and learning how these guys throw their best pitches, but not wanting to write a pitching manual. I'm not a coach, I'm a storyteller, and so much of baseball, like we were saying earlier, is passed down from generation to generation, and it's linked through the years, through these connections. And so at the time I was, what I am now, a national baseball writer. So I got to be around these people a lot and see all these different teams and make all these connections and contacts. And so just in the course of my reporting, it might be like the Twins, doing a story on the Twins, and Molitor was their manager, and at the end of an interview saying, "Hey, by the way, Paul, what was the single hardest pitch you ever had to face?" And he's like, "Man, it was Ron Guidry's slider, and I tell you why, because and then he would tell you a story, and you would just grab that anecdote. Or you're at Clearwater in spring training, and there's Mike Schmidt, and ask him, what was it like to face Nolan Ryan's curve? What was the hardest thing about facing Nolan Ryan? Or what about Bruce Suter's splitter made it so hard to hit?" That kind of thing. Just picking off little things here and there, and then targeting every pitcher who threw one pitch particularly well that I could think of. And so for 3 years, I researched it and just sort of set out on a scavenger hunt to find these pitchers who had one pitch that was great. And and fortunately I was able to, over that 3 year course, 3 years, talk to almost everybody I want to talk to. And I look back now and I'm like, boy, I'm so glad I did it when I did, because let's say I'd started that project now, I wouldn't have been able to talk to Bob Gibson and J.R. Richard and Phil Necro and Don Sutton and Bruce Suter and a whole bunch of other, Doug Jones and other people who have died since then. To Gaylord Perry, I talked to briefly. Just baseball has lost a lot of those big characters and big figures, and I was able to grab a lot of them just in time. Jim Bouton, who I knew fairly well, Tim Wakefield, I can't believe he's gone. So Roy Halladay, Halladay was a guy I chased for a couple of years, and then finally, when he came back to work for the Phillies were like, "Hey, you were looking for Halladay the last couple of years. He's here. You want to talk to him?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I want to talk to Roy Halladay." We talked about, his pitching philosophies and his cutters and all that, sinkers and all that stuff. One day at spring training at the picnic tables there in Clearwater, and he died 7 or 8 months later. 8 months later. Who knew? I was just lucky that the timing worked out for the book. So I was really, really proud of how that one came out. Every detail down to the photos on the cover, the photos on the inside, everything had a purpose, and that was a lot of fun. And the World Series book too. I went right into that after it. And because I was going to
ask you about that. I'm halfway through that book right now.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the World Series, and again, didn't want to do a pitching manual the first time because I'm not a coach. I didn't want to do a chronology because I felt like that's boring to me. That's like a reference book, and I wanted to do more storytelling. So I got into different topics within the World Series, and arranged it that way. And I was happy with that one too. So I see we still have a few more hands up. So
we do have a few more hands up. So let's go to John.
And Floyd keeps raising his hand too. So don't forget Floyd, because I see he has a question.
Has he been okay? So I'm going to go to Floyd first. Floyd, if you had a question, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And I think did you have a question? Where are you, Floyd?
Here I am.
Okay, go for it, my friend.
Okay, Tyler, good to hear you and see you. Earlier in mentioning the Yankee coverage, you were talking about all the great players, and you mentioned something like Clemens and A-Rod with those Hall of Fame numbers. And we know where they are with the Hall of Fame, and we know about the ethics or morals clause in the bylaws of getting into the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Yet all these players are still waiting and waiting, and I don't want to see the Veterans Committee be a back door because you still have the same rules. Do you have any suggestions for how we could honor? Honor is an ironic word. I know these great players without ruining the standards because of the incredible numbers.
Yeah, well, I think that's the great thing. If you go to Cooperstown, have you been to Cooperstown and
many times?
Yeah, so I mean, like they have artifacts from Pete Rose and Clemens and A-Rod and all those guys, McGuire. Yeah, they tell the story of the steroid era, but they also tell the story of those players, and their records, stand as records, as they should, I think. But putting them in the plaque gallery is a different decision, and
yes.
And now it's in the hands of the small committees. So if the composition of a committee in the future lines up to have a lot of people who want them in, then they'll be in. The writers came really close on Schilling and fairly close on Bonds and Clemens. I don't think I mean, A-Rod is and Manny are going to have a really hard time because they actually failed during the testing era and actually served suspensions, which Clemens and Bonds and McGuire never did. I don't know. I mean, I think it's in their hands now, and I don't know if it happens. It'll probably be a long time from now, because I don't get the sense that the Hall of Famers themselves want those guys in, even though some Hall of Famers themselves surely did do steroids but didn't get outed about it. So that's why I have to have a standard. For me, I have to have a standard of the testing and suspension era. Because I'm sure there are guys in there who did steroids, but they just covered their tracks or got lucky because their trainers didn't talk or whatever. And that feels weird to me, that we give these highest honor to one people, these other people are banished when they probably did the same stuff. So give me the give me the truth, which is the suspended or not suspended. If you weren't suspended, to me, then baseball sanctioned you to be out there every day, and maybe you got away with it. But I don't know. That's how I look at it. But I don't think it's a huge outrage, though. I mean, if I go every time I go into the plaque gallery, I don't leave thinking like, man, that was unsatisfying because I didn't see Barry Bonds' plaque up there. Like, he made decisions, and you know, that was the risk that they took is with their legacies. So you know, they get to keep their records, keep their money, and keep everything, but you know, they don't have a plaque.
Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome, Floyd.
There's a couple of those guys that I really don't want to see in the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to get into who they are because I don't want to get this into a debate of that idea. But I agree with Tyler on that estimation. I am going to go to John Pakutka. John, how you doing? Did I pronounce it right, my friend?
Perfectly. Thank you. Sorry, Bruce, just trying to get the technicals right here. Thanks for doing this, Bruce. And thank you so much, Tyler, for coming as well.
Sure.
Tyler, hoping you could talk a little bit about, if you were getting into this business today, talk about the advice you might give. For instance, my 14-year-old daughter, who's here with me and who is a published SABR author already.
Whoa. Get her on camera.
Well, I have my daughter's 22 and she just went into the journalism business herself. I mean, she's a writer for the Austin American Statesman down there in Texas, and not sports. But I bring that up to say that I couldn't discourage someone who wanted to do that as a career, right? Like I know the industry is discouraging in a lot of ways. Fewer opportunities, less job security. But I mean, I never dissuaded my own daughter from going into it because that was what she was good at, and that was her passion. And she went to school for it. She got a journalism degree and everything, and so she's taken her shot. You know, I've always felt that people who are talented and willing to work hard and are driven and are willing to work anywhere for low pay at the start, if you can check all those boxes, you probably have a good chance. But you got to check all of them, and you got to make sure that that you have that talent and that passion, and that you're willing to work hard and work anywhere and work for low pay at the start. So a lot of people don't have all those, and then they drop off, or it's not for them. But if you have all those things, I don't know how you can't. I don't know how you can't pursue it. Because to me, I mean, I just, again, it's like I'd love to be rich, but I don't think I'd be happy or as fulfilled, as I am being a sports writer and being comfortable and being fine, but not chasing like the millions in some other field, where I wouldn't be satisfied. I think if you have a chance to do something that you really love and that you're passionate about, got to take that chance. And maybe it won't work out. Maybe there won't be an opportunity somewhere, and maybe at some point you'll just have to say, this isn't I can't keep trying. I mean, it happens in the minor leagues all the time. Players like, the odds are always against any aspiring baseball player, right? I mean, even first round picks, most of them don't turn out to be great players, but like they give it a shot, and at some point, it's like the Brock Purdy's dad, like he pitched for 8 years in the minors. He probably could have kept going, but at one point he decided, like, you know what, I'm going to go off into business and raise my kids because it's just probably not going to happen. And so if you reach that point and it's probably not going to happen, then you go find something else. But if you have passion and you're good at something, I would say just see that through. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you got to see it through.
Thank you.
So what has Elena published, John?
You may recall this most recent Baseball Research Journal
Yes.
issue. We published the piece on relief pitchers in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, gee whiz. Okay, sure. Yep. That's
Wow,
terrific.
all right. Great. What do you think of Billy Wagner?
He's our number one top reliever, not yet in the Hall of Fame.
So close. So close.
Oh, yeah, broke my heart.
He'll
Let's
make
move
it
along
next.
here. Andy Hegroth is with us today from St. Louis. He got up early for this. Andy, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Bruce. Hi, hi, Tyler.
Hey, Andy, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm curious. You mentioned the Philadelphia Phillies and the 19 and some of the players growing up. But my question is about the 1993 Phillies. Do you remember? What was it like? What was it like following that team? And have you been able to capture any stories from some of the players on that team?
Yeah, the 93 Phillies were a sudden phenomenon, a comet streaking across the baseball world. It was just, they didn't win, but it was almost like the way they flamed out was just so memorable and so appropriate, to lose a 15-14 game in the rain and then to lose on a walk-off homer, the wild thing, giving it up. That team had more personality, more characters, more dramatic wins and crazy zany moments than any fan has a right to experience in the lifetime. It was just, from the start of spring training that year, it was my senior year in high school, they just had a different vibe. It was like they had finished last the year before. They had a good team. They hadn't had a winning playoff team in 10 years, but it was just like this confluence of guys, like really good, solid big leaguers. They had good platoons. They were ahead of their time in terms of on base percentage. They just wore down pitchers. They had brawn, so they had that on base and power combo. They were probably forerunners of they probably got it on the front end of the steroid thing, if we're being honest. A lot of those guys looked like they were all jacked. They caught the NL East at the perfect time because the Pirates had just started cleaning house and the Braves didn't get in the division until the next year. So it was kind of their one shot. And I mean, yeah, the stories, I used to, have pretty good access to Kurt Schilling. I would talk to Schilling about, for the book, both books actually, about some of his memories of that team and Dalton and what he meant. And, I see Kruk around. Ruben Amaro I'm pretty close with. He was a bench guy on that team for a lot of that year. I've gotten to know certain other guys over the years. Roger Mason was my born Mornadini. I mean, I love all those guys. It was just such a fun year. And when they got to the Braves series and they won the first game on a walk-off, and then they got blown out the next 2 days, it was like, all right, well, it was a nice run. The Braves are better. And then they had these ridiculous miracle wins in Atlanta in games 4 and 5 and came home to the vet and closed them out. I mean, that was one thing when I was I had started in college. I was in Nashville for the end of that season. I went back for the World Series games and 2 of the playoff games, but that made me real homesick because I was like, oh my God, the Phillies are doing this and I'm so far away. but it was just, I mean, I have pennants over there of the 93 Phillies. I got some other 93 Philly stuff over there. You know, to be around them a little bit that year, to get to write about them as that season was going on in the clubhouse, and they were just a bunch of dirt dogs, man. Like, there are not a lot of teams like that anymore, where they would just sit around drinking beer after games, talking baseball. You know, they were baseball rats in like the best sense of it. And but there were oases in there. There were like guys who were easier to talk to for a young kid. Like Terry Mulholland was super nice to me. You know, we did a couple of long stories in the magazine about the ins and outs of pitching, where I would ask Terry about all these different topics, and he would, you know, get deep with me on it. Jim Eisenreich was a real sweetheart. Just a really good guy. Morandini was a nice guy. Tommy Green. I mean, they had plenty of guys there who were nice guys, but they were tough-edged baseball men. You know, you had Johnny Jim Fergosi, you know, some of these guys, you know, Larry Boa, you know, some of these Vukovic, you know, a lot of old school hard baseball men, and they instilled that in that team. And the biggest thing about that team, nobody got hurt all year. They didn't have any injuries. It was amazing. It was like it never happens that way. But like, the team you plan is the team that you run the table with. And so, you know, they never had much adversity. They hit a couple bumps toward the end of the year, but smoothed those over. And yeah, I could go on about the 93 Phillies forever.
That's super cool. Thank you. I'm a Cardinals fan, and I think I remember hearing a story that in the 93 spring training, the Phillies got into a big brawl with Joe Torre's Cardinals in spring training. So it kind of typified the edge of how tough-minded that team was. So I was just curious about what you thought about that team.
Yeah, the big Cardinal game that year was on Mother's Day. Lee Smith gave up a grand slam to Mariano Duncan on and it was just like, you know, this is really happening. Like, it was people still talk about that, the Mother's Day grand slam off Lee Smith. But that was the thing. That's what winning teams do, right? I mean, you had guys like Duncan who come up with huge, memorable moments, and Mitch Williams getting a walk-off hit at 4:40 in the morning against the. I mean, it was just insane. And Harry Callis to narrate the whole thing for everybody. It was great. So you got a great beat writer there in St. Louis with my best friend Derek Gould. He's my best buddy in the business. He's the man. So yeah, Colonels will be better this year, I think.
I'm hoping so, with the signings that they made for the rotation, and they just recently signed Kenyon Middleton to help out with the bullpen. So we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah. I see another St. Louis fan over here. Wayne has been waiting patiently. Wayne,
he
with his
certainly
St.
has
Louis
been waiting
Browns
patiently.
jersey. I love it. I love that little that brownie elf on the sleeve.
Well, and it's a St. Louis Browns Satchel Paige jersey.
Wow. All right.
I'm in Baltimore, so the Browns, their predecessor.
There you go. Yeah.
You can't go wrong with it. But thanks for noticing. Yeah, I love the brownie. Couple questions about interviews. Did I hear you right when you were talking about your homemade magazine when you were a teenager, that you would interview players like the Phillies and come down to Baltimore? I wonder if what you remember about that, what that was like, even technically pulling that off as a teenager. And then when you became a pro, interviewing Mike Mussina, who was famously stoic and really smart and didn't take any BS. What was that like? So the interviewing as a kid and then interviewing Mussina.
Well, my entry into baseball really was, my dad was in the Army Reserves with David Montgomery in the late 60s. And David went on to be, you know, executive VP of the Phillies, and then eventually chairman of the Phillies. You know, he made it all the way to the top. Basically, he went from the bleacher seats and then started selling tickets and worked his way all the way up to the top of the organization. But Dave was a wonderful, wonderful man, one of the greatest people I've ever known. And he, I think, you know, told the PR staff, hey, you know, a family friend is doing this magazine. Why don't you see if he can give him a field pass, see what he can do. So I got one interview with a rookie pitcher named Pat Combs in the spring of 1990. I was 15. I just turned 15 the day before. And they brought me down. I talked to Pat. It went well. few months later, a film crew was doing a story on me for ABC News, kid with a baseball magazine kind of thing, and so I got credentials with them, and just kind of held my own. I got to know all the Phillies PR people, and they saw that I could, I wasn't abusing the privilege. I was, handling myself well. And so I just started getting daily passes. And then in 92, I guess, they're like, look, we're giving you passes just about every day. We're writing these up every day. Here's a full season pass. Just come on, everyone. So I'm like, wow. So I had full season passes. I guess 92 was my end of my junior year. So, so I could just, once I got my license, basically junior year, I could just start going to games all the time. But I would get nervous beforehand, but never when I was really in their presence. It was because they looked just like they did on TV and their baseball cards. They didn't look any different. They looked. I felt like I knew them already. And as long as I prepared on the front end, I'd come to the ballpark and I'd be a little nervous. But once I would get down there, the preparation that I had done would kind of take over, and just the knowledge that I had already. I've always had kind of an ability to sort of, make connections. Like, oh, you played with, I'm writing a story about Brett Butler. He's on the Dodgers. I talked to him last week. Well, here come the Giants. I talked to his former teammates about him. Like you put things together. You develop a plan, so you're not just writing about that day. You're getting things for multiple stories at the same time. So there was always things to do. I always had a game plan, and I would bring my magazine. I would show them what I did. I would only approach them when they clearly had time. You learn pretty quickly when to approach guys, when to back off. That it's their work environment, and that you're there working too, but it's their room. And so if they're talking to a teammate, if they're watching TV, if they're otherwise occupied, you don't ask them for anything. But like if they're by themselves, or if they're walking from place to place, whatever, approach them politely, show them who you are, and show that you're genuine about it. They're usually great. It was a really great early introduction into just how to behave with grown-ups. Treat them with respect. Show them that you understand who you are relative to them. Like they have all the expertise, but you've done a lot of preparation, so you can ask better questions and don't ask questions that you already know the answer to. Like be genuine in wanting to know. And I think they responded pretty well, because they saw someone who really loved baseball, really wanted to know what they knew, and was doing it in a respectful manner. So I got very few times when I was like blown off by guys. I thought, for some reason, they'd all be rude, or I thought they'd all, most of them would be kind of jerks, and they weren't at all. They were just like random, like not random. They're just like regular cool dudes. You just approach them with that genuine. There's a lot of bullshit in baseball, and I think players can sniff, can sense that. And if you're in it for the right reasons, that comes across. And I think that was the same way with Messina. Like, Mike could be prickly, but Mike just had very low tolerance for people who weren't prepared, or people who asked formulaic, going through the motions kind of questions. The old phrase, "You didn't suffer fools," but that actually went for everybody, not just reporters. Like, once he got to know you, Mike was actually in some ways closer to some of the writers and media than he was to his own teammates, because even though they shared a very uncommon skill, to play baseball, they didn't go to Stanford and graduate in 3.5 years. I didn't either, but I mean, I went to a good school, and most of the writers, all the writers were, college educated people. And not that Messina would sit there and pontificate about the meaning of life, but he could just, he valued people who he valued smart people who could carry on a conversation and share his sense of humor and appreciate it. And once he recognized that in you, it was great. I learned more about baseball from Mike Messina than any other player I've ever been around. Because we would talk about it, we would go deep on it, but also he just was so smart. He had a way of explaining things that I could understand as someone who never played pro baseball. So he helped me so much for my first book. I went up to Montoursville, PA, where he was born and raised and still lives. Had lunch with him, spent a couple hours just talking about the ins and outs of pitching. Just a brilliant guy. And to be there when he, on the last day of his career, finally got his 20th win of a season, and just to see him eating McDonald's in the clubhouse afterwards, like, job well done, 270 wins. Like, we didn't know that was it, but we kind of had a good feeling. I was very happy for him because he's a good person, and learned a ton from him.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right, Wayne.
Fantastic. Well, Tyler, why don't you tell us where we can find those books?
Oh, anywhere books are sold, just type them in on Google and you can find them. The K and the Grandest Stage. But I'm on the Athletic and Twitter, and anytime Bruce has an Immaculate Grid tournament, I'll be there. So
we've made plans for our second Immaculate Grid tournament. Hopefully this spring, I'm going to bring Tyler back as our grand champion. As I said before we opened up the room to him, something a little like Ken Jennings from Jeopardy. So he'll be appearing again. Don't worry. This has been a great first session for SABR Day. Tyler Kepner, can't thank you enough for doing this. I am very, very grateful for you taking time out. Thanks a ton.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Good questions. Good to be here. Have a great
We are
day.
going to see you back here at noon for Lindsay Berra and at 4:00 for Andy Tutkin. Monday night with Matt Grafer, the young professor from the Savannah Bananas. We'll see you at 12 noon, everybody. Thanks a lot.